There are moments in life when the most powerful thing a person can do is absolutely nothing. No outburst, no accusation shouted into a crowded room, no tearful press conference, no dramatic confrontation in a hallway, just silence, deliberate, strategic, suffocating silence. And for 10 years, that is exactly what she chose. Not because she was afraid, not because she had forgotten, but because she was waiting for the moment when everything she had carefully, methodically, painfully assembled would land with the force of something no one could deny, dismiss, or bury. Her name was Claire Ashworth, and the man whose career she would one day dismantle with a single email had no idea she was coming. She was 26 years old when she first walked into the offices of Meridian Group, a mid-sized consulting firm in Chicago that prided itself on a reputation for excellence, discretion, and what its glossy brochure called a culture of mutual respect. She believed in that language. She had studied hard, graduated top of her class from Northwestern, turned down 2 other offers to take this one. She had a plan, a 5-year trajectory mapped out in careful detail in a notebook she kept on her nightstand. She was ambitious in the way that only people who have never had their ambition used against them can be. His name was Daniel Forsyth, Senior Managing Director, 14 years at the firm, the kind of man who filled a room before he entered it, whose laugh arrived before he did, who shook hands just a half-second too long and watched you notice it. He was the person who had personally signed off on Claire's hire. He told her during her first week that she reminded him of himself at her age. She took it as a compliment. She would spend years understanding that it was a warning. It started slowly. It always does. A comment here, a lingering look across the conference table, an invitation to stay late to debrief on a project that had already been thoroughly debriefed. She told herself she was reading too much into it, that this was how senior leadership operated, that the discomfort she felt in the elevator when he stood too close was her own inexperience making itself known. She told herself the things that women have been taught to tell themselves since before any of them were born. Then one evening in November, 3 months into her tenure, he called her into his office at 7:30 when the floor had emptied, closed the door, and said something to her that no professional context could explain or justify. She stood very still. She kept her face neutral. She said, "I don't think that's appropriate," in a voice so calm it surprised even her. He laughed, not the laugh of a man who was embarrassed, the laugh of a man who had done this before and knew how it ended. She went home that night and sat at her kitchen table for a long time without turning on the lights. She thought about what she should do. She ran through every possible option with the precision of someone who had been trained to analyze risk. Report it to HR. Tell a colleague. Quit. Say nothing. She thought about what it would mean to report it. She had been there 90 days. He had been there 14 years. She had a good memory, but no witnesses, no recording, no documentation. She had the memory of his words and the feeling still crawling across her skin and nothing else. She did not quit. She did not go to HR. Not yet. Instead, she did something that would define the next decade of her life. She went to her laptop, opened a new document, and she started writing. Date, time, location, exactly what was said, exactly what was done. The precise words, in the precise order, with the precise inflection she could still hear echoing in that quiet office. She wrote it all down with the detachment of a forensic scientist cataloging evidence at a crime scene. Then she saved the document to a personal encrypted drive, closed her laptop, and went to bed. She went back to work the next morning. What followed over the next 8 months was a sustained campaign of behavior that, had it been documented at the time by anyone with institutional power, would have ended Daniel Forsyth's career on the spot. But it wasn't, because he was careful. He was practiced. He had spent years learning exactly how much he could do and remain deniable. He never put anything in writing. He never acted in front of witnesses he didn't trust. He operated in that precise bandwidth between what could be proven and what could be felt, and he had calibrated it to perfection over a very long time. Claire documented everything, every comment, every incident, every invitation she deflected, and the precise way he reacted when she did. She noted the shift in her performance reviews, which had begun stellar and had started to accumulate small, vague criticisms that she had never received from any other supervisor. She noted the projects she was quietly removed from, the meetings she stopped being invited to, the way colleagues who had once been warm began to behave with a careful neutrality around her, as though proximity to her displeasure might be contagious. In month 9, she finally went to HR. She sat across from a woman named Patricia Solt, who had a gentle voice and a practiced expression of concern, and she told her story calmly and completely. Patricia listened. She took notes. She told Claire that the firm took these matters very seriously and that there would be a thorough internal review. Claire handed over copies of her personal documentation. Not the originals. Copies. She had already learned enough to know the difference. The internal review lasted 6 weeks. At the end of it, Patricia called her back in and told her that the investigation had been unable to substantiate the claims, that Daniel Forsythe had denied everything, that there were no witnesses, and that the firm considered the matter closed. She handed Claire a pamphlet about the company's employee assistance program and asked if she wanted a referral to a counselor. Claire looked at her for a moment. Then she said, "Thank you for your time," picked up her bag and walked out. She did not raise her voice. She did not cry. She went back to her desk, opened her encrypted drive, created a new folder, and titled it HR Meeting, P-Salt Date Outcome, No Action. She saved every document she had provided to HR, along with her own account of the meeting itself, time-stamped, detailed, and precise. Then she kept working. 2 months later, she was laid off in what the firm called a structural reorganization. The severance was clean, the language was neutral, and the timing was careful enough that nothing could be proven. She signed what she had to sign to receive the severance. She kept what she was legally permitted to keep. She said nothing publicly. She got a job at another firm. Then another. She built a career on her own terms, in places where she could breathe, where her work was recognized for what it was. She married. She had a daughter. She built a life that was genuinely good. And the whole time, across 10 years, across cities and jobs and seasons, she maintained that encrypted drive with the quiet faithfulness of a gardener tending something that was not yet ready to bloom. Because Daniel Forsythe had not stopped. She knew this the way you know things when you have survived someone and have the clarity to watch from a distance. She saw the firm grow. She saw him promoted twice. She saw him quoted in industry publications, photographed at charity galas, invited to speak on panels about leadership and workplace culture. She saw him receive an award from a professional association for his contributions to mentorship. She watched him build a public persona that was the precise, polished inverse of what she knew him to be, and she kept every clipping, every article, every photo, filed with the same care she gave everything else. She was not consumed by it. That is the part that people later found hardest to understand. She was not sitting in a darkened room, obsessing over revenge. She had a full life, a real life, a life she had built with her own hands in spite of everything. But she also had a discipline that most people never develop, the ability to hold something at the periphery of her attention for years without letting it corrode her center. She had decided, somewhere in that first dark November kitchen, that if the moment ever came, she would be ready. And readiness required maintenance. She joined professional networks, not to advance anything, just to stay connected, to keep her ear to the ground, to remain a familiar name in circles adjacent to his. She was careful. She was patient. She was not waiting for a moment of anger. She was waiting for a moment of clarity, the kind that arrives not with heat, but with the clean, cold certainty of something falling into place. It came in the form of an email she received on a Tuesday afternoon in March, 7 years after her termination. It came from a woman named Simone Park, who had found Claire's name through a professional contact, who had spent 3 weeks working up the nerve to send the message, and who wrote simply, "I think we may have had a similar experience. I would very much like to talk, if you're open to it." Claire read the email twice. She felt something shift in her chest that she could not immediately name. She closed her laptop, and she sat with it for an hour. Then she replied, "Yes." Let's talk. Simone was 31. She had joined Meridian Group 4 years earlier, the same way Claire had, with talent, with ambition, with a careful 5-year plan. What had happened to her followed a pattern that Claire recognized in its every detail with a precision that made her physically cold. The same escalation, the same calibrated deniability, the same shift in her evaluations, the same quiet removal from projects, the same HR report that led to the same 6-week investigation that led to the same practiced language about unsubstantiated claims. Simone had not been laid off. She had been managed out more slowly, her role gradually hollowed until leaving felt like her own choice. She had only been gone for 8 months when she reached out to Claire. They met in person 2 weeks later, in a coffee shop in downtown Chicago. They sat across from each other and they talked for 4 hours. Not with the frantic energy of people releasing something long held, but with the careful, measured clarity of 2 people comparing notes. Claire listened to everything Simone said. She asked precise questions. She took no notes during the meeting. She did not want to make Simone feel like a deposition. Afterward, she drove home, went to her kitchen table, and wrote down everything she could remember, time-stamped, detailed, thorough. Then she went back to her encrypted drive, and she started building something new. She was not a lawyer, but she had spent 10 years learning, quietly and systematically, everything a person could learn about workplace law, institutional documentation, evidentiary standards, and the specific mechanics of how these cases succeed and fail. She had read every publicly available ruling in cases that resembled her own. She had developed, over the years, an informal understanding of what the difference looked like between a case that collapses and a case that holds. She had been building toward a threshold, and now, for the first time, she believed she was standing on the edge of it. She hired an attorney, not a firm, one attorney, a woman named Renata Voss, who had spent 20 years in employment law and whose reputation was built on cases that other lawyers had declined. Claire sent her the encrypted drive before their first meeting. Renata called her back within 48 hours. "How long have you been keeping this?" she asked. Claire told her. There was a pause on the line. "Do you understand what you have here?" Renata said. Claire said, "I believe so." Renata said, "I don't think you do." Not yet. What Claire had, laid out across 10 years of documentation, was a pattern. And pattern, in these cases, is everything. A single incident can be isolated, contextualized, disputed, and buried. But a pattern documented across a decade, cross-referenced with a second victim whose experience tracked the first with near-identical precision, corroborated by timestamp records, preserved HR correspondence, performance review discrepancies, and a paper trail of professional marginalization. That is something else entirely. That is a case. They worked for 2 months before sending anything. During those 2 months, Claire and Renata worked through every document with the methodical patience of people who understood that what they were building would only work if it was airtight. They organized the timeline. They crosswalked Claire's documentation with Simone's account and identified every point of corroboration. They pulled public records, professional filings, the firm's stated HR policies from every year in which the incidents had occurred. They built an index. They built a summary. They built a file that Renata said, with quiet professional satisfaction, was among the most thorough she had ever received from a client. Claire asked her, once, whether she thought it was enough. Renata looked at her for a moment and said, "It's not about enough. It's about what happens when they open it and realize they can't make it go away." They sent a legal notice to the firm and to Daniel Forsythe's personal attorney on a Monday morning. They gave the firm 10 business days to respond with a proposed resolution. They made clear what the alternative looked like. The firm's response came on day 9, through a partner at their outside counsel, and it was, as these responses almost always are, a careful, clinical message that expressed neither admission nor denial and proposed a conversation. Claire had anticipated this. She had also anticipated what would happen next, which was a quiet, extended process of negotiation designed to result in a settlement with a non-disclosure agreement attached, a clean financial resolution that would make the entire matter disappear as thoroughly as her original complaint had. She had watched this happen to other women. She had read about it in rulings and in journalism and in the accounts of women who had come before her and accepted what was offered because there was nothing else available. She was not going to accept it. She told Renata to break off the negotiations. Renata, who had seen how this industry operated for 2 decades, asked her once if she was certain. Claire said she was. Renata said, "All right, then let's talk about what comes next." What came next was a lawsuit, filed in Cook County, meticulously documented, and structured with the specific intention of being publicly available. The filing itself became a document of record. The filing itself told the story. And then, on the morning the filing became public, Claire Ashworth did the one thing that Daniel Forsyth, his attorneys, his firm, and every institutional mechanism designed to contain situations like this one had never prepared for. She sent an email. It was not a long email. It did not need to be. The subject line read, "For your information, public filing, Ashworth and Park versus Meridian Group and Daniel Forsyth." The body of the email contained 3 paragraphs. The first briefly stated what had happened to her and to Simone. The second noted the date the internal HR complaint had been filed and the date it had been closed with no action. The third contained a link to the full public filing, which contained the complete documentation she had assembled across 10 years. The email was sent to the firm's entire client list, which she had assembled through public records, professional networks, and a year of careful attention. It was sent to every professional association to which Daniel Forsyth belonged. It was sent to every journalist who covered the consulting and financial services industry. It was sent to the editorial boards of 3 trade publications that had featured him. It was sent to the members of the board that had given him his mentorship award. It was sent to the organizing committee of the conference where he was scheduled to speak in 6 weeks. And it was CC'd to 314 recipients in total, every single one of them a person with the institutional standing to do something with what it contained. She did not send it in anger. She sent it from her home office, at her kitchen table, on a Wednesday morning, with a cup of coffee cooling beside her keyboard. Her daughter was at school. The house was quiet. She read it one final time, made one small correction to a sentence in the second paragraph, and pressed send. Then she closed her laptop, picked up her coffee, and went to stand at the kitchen window for a while. What happened next happened quickly, and then very thoroughly. The conference withdrew his speaking invitation within 4 hours. 2 clients issued statements within 24 hours indicating they were reviewing their relationships with the firm. One professional association announced it had opened an inquiry by the end of the week. A journalist published a piece within 72 hours that expanded on the documentation in the filing with additional reporting. 3 more women reached out to Renata's office within the first 10 days. The firm placed Daniel Forsyth on administrative leave within 2 weeks and announced his departure, characterized, in language that fooled no one, as a mutual decision within the month. His LinkedIn profile went dark. His conference appearances disappeared from the schedule. His name vanished from the firm's website with the quiet thoroughness of something being carefully erased. The professional architecture he had spent 22 years constructing, the reputation, the awards, the speaking platforms, the industry relationships, the carefully maintained image of a leader worth emulating, all of it came apart in the span of weeks with a speed that was directly proportional to how thoroughly Claire had built her case and how publicly she had released it. The lawsuit was settled 14 months later. The terms were not disclosed. The non-disclosure agreement covered the financial details only. It covered nothing else. People asked Claire afterward, and they asked her in various ways across various contexts, how she had managed to wait that long, how she had kept it together for a decade without saying anything publicly, how she had continued to function, to grow, to build a life, while carrying what she carried. Some people asked it with admiration, some with something closer to bewilderment. A few asked it, she noticed, with a faint undertone of skepticism, as though patience that complete and deliberate seemed somehow suspicious. She gave different answers depending on who was asking. To journalists, she talked about documentation and process. To other women who reached out to her privately, she was more specific. She told them what she had learned, which was this: that anger by itself is a fire that burns through everything, including the person holding it. That what she had developed over 10 years was not the suppression of anger, but its transformation into something colder and more durable. She had turned what had been done to her into architecture. She had built it room by room, year by year, with the care of someone who understood that when the moment came, the structure had to hold. She also told them something else, something she had come to understand only toward the end, in those final months of preparation. She told them that the silence had never been weakness. She said that the people who had dismissed her, who had closed her complaint and managed her out and assumed she would dissipate like smoke, they had made a very specific and very costly mistake. They had confused her stillness with acceptance. They had looked at a woman who was not making noise and concluded that she was not a threat. They had looked at a woman who had gone quiet and decided she had given up. They had not understood what she was doing. They had not recognized that what looked like disappearance was, in fact, preparation. They had not seen the decade of work accumulating behind a closed door, organized and indexed and cross-referenced, growing with every passing year into something that no amount of institutional muscle or legal maneuvering would be able to stop once it was finally released into the world. She had not gotten loud. She had gotten precise. And precision, in the end, had a reach that volume never could. There is a particular kind of power that gets built in silence that cannot be built any other way. It requires a patience that most people cannot sustain, not because they lack the will, but because the world consistently rewards noise and penalizes waiting. The world tells us that if we are not visibly fighting, we have stopped fighting. The world mistakes stillness for surrender. Claire Ashworth knew something the world had not yet caught up to. She knew that the most devastating thing she could do was to simply wait until what she had was undeniable, and then let it speak in a voice so clear and so complete that there was no room left for anyone to look away. One email, 314 recipients, 10 years in the making, and a man who had spent 2 decades building a career on the assumption that women like her eventually go quiet, finally, permanently, absolutely wrong.